Good evening, everybody. Hell's Unicorn here once again. I apologize for my absence yet again. It's been a couple of days since I've done a video log here, but I've been in a state of prognostication here. I'm basically in full campaign mode right now, so everything is completely revolving around the up and coming South Carolina primary. But I don't want to so much talk about the outcome of this primary, but more the absolute ramifications of where we are right now and where it's most likely to proceed. This is where the prognosticating kind of comes into things. I've been taking an assessment over everything that's happened over the past couple days. I've taken into account the fact that Paul didn't have a particularly good debate performance this past Monday. He had a much, much better one last night. But there were a few things that I wanted to digest and a few more things that I wanted to observe before I made this particular commentary. So that's the reason why I'm making it tonight instead of last night. What seems to be going on right now, and again, this is just me doing an overall assessment of the way things are panning out right now, both online and in the media in general. Newt Gingrich appears to be the odds-on favorite to take South Carolina. And I hear a lot of people that are getting very, very paranoid about this. People that are saying now Newt is the new front runner. Now Newt all of a sudden is going to have this huge national campaign and all is lost and we're probably not going to make it past Florida. That's the vibe that I'm getting from the crowd, particularly over at Ron Paul forums. Daily Paul is a little bit more upbeat. All I have to say to this is you guys got to think big picture here. Momentum is not everything, especially when you still have 4 competitors still in the race and all of them are going for each other's throats. South Carolina is one state, and compared to some of the other states coming later, it does not have that big a number of delegates. And in this game, everything is about delegates. Momentum is good. Delegates are much better. When you look at the spread in terms of total points, percentage points, between Paul and Santorum and Romney in Iowa, it was not terribly significant, and the delegate allocation, according to CNN in particular, was entirely equal. All 3 of them got 7. Santorum and Romney got a momentary bump in the polls because of it, and you see how much good that's doing for Santorum right now. He is struggling not to come in last place in South Carolina, and I think that if he does come in last place tomorrow, which I think is very likely, he will have to drop out. He might not drop out until after he does real terribly in Florida, which he will, but he is not going to be doing well, and he has no national campaign. He's got the backing of a lot of evangelicals. And the reason why he does, well, there's a couple reasons. Number one, they're not backing the actual Christian conservative Ron Paul because they've believed nearly every lie that's been told about him, and they've got blood and the fury of 1,000 crusades going on in their heads regarding the Middle East. They're more concerned about some distant enemy with no boats or planes to attack us with, no Navy or Air Force to speak of, and they have no problem whatsoever with the fact that they are leaning towards endorsing in the case of Santorum, a radical and very much partisan Roman Catholic who has been a member of the Opus Dei, which is a group that is actually hell-bent on destroying every Protestant church in this country through a slow incremental process. On the other hand, you have a Lutheran turned Roman Catholic in Newt Gingrich that's got more baggage than every single airport in this country. And I'm going to get to Gingrich in a minute, but I want to focus just for a minute on these evangelicals. These evangelicals, they cannot get it together. They are so confused right now. We have a candidate in Ron Paul that at his worst 1 year, because he votes against unconstitutional propositions in a couple of supposedly pro-life bills, gets just over 50% on 1 year. Most of the years, his voting record is either 80 or an absolute 100%. And again, these scores are not really so much reflective of an overall pro-life philosophy. It's a matter of tactics. The Right to Life campaign wants a federal solution to a state problem. That's how we got into this mess. The reason why abortion, and for the most part abortion on demand in particular, which is the most heinous part of it, is available in all 50 states is because the Supreme Court supplanted the right and privilege of the states to oversee violent crime. And from the standpoint of anybody who is pro-life, who believes that abortion is murder, murder is defined as a violent act. If you are pro-life and you believe that abortion, you by necessary consequence believe that abortion is an act of violence, and as such, it's supposed to be handled by the state government. If Massachusetts doesn't want to prosecute their murderers, that's fine. That's not my problem. I don't live there. If one of those murderers decides to leave that state and come down here, and my state has pro-life laws, then we've got a problem. This is how the whole issue of state sovereignty works. Rick Santorum doesn't understand this at all. Not one bit. And that's the reason why he did so terribly at that personhood forum the night before last. You know, the one where they were complaining on the Daily Beast about how Paul's supporters, and we don't even know if it was Paul's supporters, it might have been Romney people, were putting flyers on the windshields of cars in the parking lot saying that Rick Santorum had a dubious pro-life record and had supported pro-choice candidates, which is true, and that he also appropriated money that ended up being used by Planned Parenthood and other hospitals for abortions, which is also true. Santorum might not have intended for that to happen, but that was what ended up happening. Another reason why it's good to be Dr. No if you're touting the pro-life line. Because if you say no to that money, there's no way that money is going to get used in the wrong way, because it's not going to get used, period. Technically, it's being used the wrong way if it's being allocated that way. Medical care is a state issue as far as I'm concerned. Now, I think that everybody in the Paul campaign needs to take a step back and to just look at the way the field is going right now. For the longest time, it was presumed that Mitt Romney was the coronated frontrunner and that nobody could oppose him. And then over the course of this week, we find out, A, he didn't win Iowa, even though it was a tawdry couple of dozen votes difference in the end. So he loses one of his two claims to victory, and it turns out that from a historical standpoint, his sweep of both Iowa and New Hampshire doesn't mean anything because it didn't happen. So he won his home state, whoopity-doo. That doesn't make him a front-runner. By contrast, Rick Santorum has no momentum. He could have had momentum by winning, but he didn't have it. He didn't capitalize on it. He finished a dismal 5th place in New Hampshire. And he's got very little traction in South Carolina, despite all of these antinomian evangelicals backing him. Now, these evangelicals will not prove to be completely antinomian, which in Christian lingo means lawless, unless they actually get behind Newt Gingrich, which might be a possibility. I can tell you one thing, every Christian woman in this country should have a huge problem voting for Newt Gingrich, given the very unchristian way that he has treated his two ex-wives. Newt Gingrich has yet to win anything yet, and yet because he's supposedly a great debater, he is now, by some strange reason, a front-runner. Because of the strong sway that the Republican establishment and also the mainstream media have right now, Newt Gingrich is going to be able to walk away with a likely victory in South Carolina. Unless something really shifts direction, I think that's what's going to happen. I think that the fact that Marianne Gingrich's interview just came out is definitely going to hurt him long term. But in the short term, I think this is going to have a similar effect to what happened with Herman Cain. People are going to circle the wagons. They're going to just see it as, oh no, the media is attacking the conservative. We have to surround him with support, even though he's not actually a very good conservative, if you're going by a consistent voting record and a record of principled and consistent leadership. So ultimately, what we have here is a chaotic situation, and I think I mentioned in a previous video that chaos serves our purposes quite well because it allows us to scoop up delegates and to slip in under the radar for the time being until the other candidates destroy each other, which is what's going on right now. I would argue that 2 or 3 weeks ago, the prospect of a Ron Paul nomination in this party was a long shot. If things play out the way I think they're going to play out in the next several weeks, it might not be the long shot that I thought it was. And I will tell you why for a couple of reasons here. I'm not going to get specific with how many reasons or whatever and be like Herman Cain. I can't stand that. There were only 2 candidates in the race until a couple days ago whom the evangelicals could have theoretically put their support behind. One of them dropped out earlier. That was Rick Perry, who had a disastrous campaign and would have crashed and burned anyway. The other one is Rick Santorum, who is also faring very poorly. So what are they going to do now? Are they going to back Gingrich with all of his baggage, with his 2 failed marriages, with his connection with the Toppler family? Or are they going to back Mitt Romney, the Mormon? I have not brought up the subject of Mormonism on this channel because from my standpoint it's an entirely peripheral issue. But I'll tell you who this is not a peripheral issue for, and that's Southern Protestant Christians. I'll tell you that right now. South Carolina is going easy on him. It looks like, from my vantage point, that he is not going to carry South Carolina. He's going to get some of those further south, more moderate areas, and he's going to do fairly well in a couple of the cities and maybe in some of the college areas. But he's not going to win that state. There is a difference between a moderate ideologically but still very much Protestant person such as McCain winning South Carolina and somebody of Romney's theological persuasion winning there. As much as people think that this entire country is suddenly this bastion of open-mindedness and tolerance, that's not really the case, and there are enough irreconcilable differences between Mormonism and mainline Protestant Christianity to prevent enough people from supporting Romney, plus the fact he has all that baggage from when he was governor of Massachusetts, the socially liberal stances and everything. However, the real problem that Romney has now is because he's been backed in a corner and he's been battered and beaten on this Bain Capital thing and on this tax thing, he's going to have to release all his tax records. And I would argue that the real reason why he hasn't released them yet is not because of any shenanigans going on with how he does his taxes, but what his write-offs actually are. A good chunk of his money goes right back into his church of preference, the Mormon faith. When people outside the Mormon church look at this and they see a revolving door of money leaving people that may not necessarily be Mormons and continually cycling itself in and out of different hands of different people in the Mormon church, what they're going to see in the LDS is a separatist organization that doesn't have their best interests at heart. I think that Romney will do well in places that have a strong Mormon presence, such as Utah, Nevada, Colorado, and maybe to an extent California. But when it comes to the Bible Belt, he's going to have huge problems. And I would argue that Gingrich, with his cavalier swinger lifestyle up until just the past 5 or 10 years, probably because he's too old for it now, is going to have just as many problems. Who does that leave? This is the reason why I argue that it is not only good, but it's also necessary that Santorum be out of the picture very soon. Because he's the only one whom there may be a possibility of the conservative Christian South coalescing behind somebody. Once all of this is said and done, and Paul is still in the race, people are going to have some hard thinking to do. This is not going to be the same as previous presidential races. This is going to go a lot longer. I think it's going to go past Super Tuesday. I think come time for Pennsylvania's very off in the distance May primary, I might actually have a choice between more than one candidate, which is what I'm hoping for. And I am very hopeful that I will be able to deliver this state for Ron Paul, his former home state of Pennsylvania. Just take a moment to digest everything that I just said, and also keep in mind that the media is lying, or misleading, if not outright lying. Give you a prime example. Saw a little bit of Fox News today, and they were arguing that Paul's audience was dwindling in size. Well, I've got news for you. When you have a huge venue packed with over 1,000 people one day, usually there's nowhere to go but down the next day, and that's the only argument I can hear for dwindling crowd numbers. If you take the massive numbers that he got at the one venue on Thursday before the debate, and the ones he did today, which were almost empty, the Southern Republican leadership thing was dead because nobody wanted to go there and spend $99. But Gingrich's campaign didn't even go there because the numbers were so low, and so instead he went to a children's hospital. Most people there are probably too young to vote. Nobody ever talks about the numbers of people that show up at Santorum's or Gingrich's events of late. They just say, oh, Paul only got a couple hundred instead of 1,000. It looks like his number's dwindling. Must have been that bad performance he had in that debate on Monday. Well, no. That event with those over 1,000 people happened yesterday. And it happened before the debate last night when he did better. And he got the endorsement of 4 major state senators in South Carolina. So he is not out of the game in South Carolina. I don't think he's going to win South Carolina. I would like it if he could, but I don't think he will at this point because the field's too crowded. But I will predict that Paul will either have a strong third place, or that if Romney implodes as much as they say he is imploding right now, he may come close to tying Mitt Romney for second place. Whenever people poll Ron Paul, no matter which polling group does it, the polling numbers are always underpolled by about 3 or 4 percentage points, and that's because they don't take into account independents and Democrats who can vote in South Carolina just as they could in Iowa and New Hampshire. Now, they can't vote in Florida, obviously, but I argue that Florida is a state that can be sacrificed. Florida is the state where Paul lays low and where Romney and Newt Gingrich tear each other apart and spend their war chest on each other. Granted, Romney has an infinite amount of money that he can draw from because he has all these super PACs. But Gingrich will tap himself out completely fighting for Florida. And given all of the gaffes that Newt Gingrich has had, like calling Spanish the language of the ghetto, which will not play well in Florida, let me tell you right now, he is going to be in for a massive fight. I will argue that Romney will probably carry Florida, and since it's a winner-take-all state, Paul should do minimal campaigning. Show up at the debates, argue your point, try to pick off as many people that are on the fence as you can, But don't blow a ton of money on advertising there. The state's way too expensive, and unfortunately, there's not enough people there that are friendly to us, at least not yet. Come general election time, if we come away with the nomination, that's another story. And people may ask, well, what's Santorum's play in Florida? The short answer is he doesn't have it. For all of this talk about how conservative Florida is closer to New Hampshire than it is to South Carolina. They're fiscally conservative, but outside of the panhandle, it is not a huge bastion for religious conservatism. And when you get down to the southern part of the coastal area where you got Miami-Dade, Palm Beach, Broward County, all those areas, trust me, those people do not go for people like Santorum. So South Carolina is Santorum's last stand, and as you can see, based on his polling right now, he is doing horribly. The only constant that I've seen in the polls is that other than everybody else being polled for the most part accurately, Ron Paul is always underpolled and Romney is always slightly overpolled. So what I'm hoping for is that holds true in South Carolina and that Paul inches up into the 20s and meets very close to where Romney ends up. But no matter where Paul ends up, provided that he beats Santorum, I will be satisfied. And if Paul can pick up a good number of delegates, I'll be happy. And so should all of you. This is not the time for doom and gloom. This is the third of 50 states. It's a long road to go, and unlike Gingrich and Santorum, we're prepared to go the distance. And you're going to need determination and you're going to need resolve if you're going to be willing to go 50 rounds with an establishment guy like Romney with an endless war chest, which is what this is ultimately going to be. So until next time, with prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.